Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's sunny and it's cold. That's the Thomas Jefferson weather report today. It's at 59 degrees. It's not that cold. And when I had my motorcycle, when the temperature hit 50, I wouldn't get on it. It was too cold to ride a bike at 50. I know others sportier than I am, I guess. But I got a bike to have fun, and I didn't want to be resisting the cold or wearing masks on a motorcycle and that kind of stuff. So today, if I had my bike, I could go out on it. It's pretty windy though, so there's that. So let's turn our attention to the war. Part of me looks for the effort to draw the United States into two battlefields, one in Ukraine and the other in Israel. And as I speak to you, there are ships making their way the Eastern Mediterranean, and I think it's the USS Ford group. And I don't know, it's an unfortunate name, I think, because I always think about him messing up in his debate for president what Poland thought of Russia. So anyhow, the United States is committed as much as it can be without a speaker, without an ability to raise more funds. But it's more complicated than that. If nothing changes, there's going to be a war, perhaps to the death or to a stalemate, something like what happened in, or what's going on in Ukraine. And the longer it goes on, the more it will attract the attention of others who see a weakness. And Netanyahu may not have the most credibility for looking for a way to peace, if that's possible. But it is clear from reports that the Hamas have a list of grievances, true or untrue. And so far, Israel has only issued a general denial. Okay, yes, everybody lies in war. I got that. But it seems to me that if these claims are not addressed, that is, they're proven false or they're accepted in part, we don't have a pathway to have any settlement. Not that that's news about Palestine and Israel. The kinds of complaints are that some of those now in Gaza lived until 1948 in what is now Israel, and they were ushered out. It talks about being blocked from the sea, blockade. There are plainly walls all around. They claim that they're attacked inside the walls. They complain that talking about Hamas now, they complain that the mosque in Jerusalem was subject to desecration and that women and children were beaten. The one thing that appears to be clear on both sides of this horrendous argument is that bloody violence, high-level dehumanization seems to attack in both directions. I also wonder if we couldn't find better language while we're covering this war to aid in a discussion about what's really going on. So, for instance, Hamas is terrorists, Israel is soldiers. The amazing reaction of people covering the war, saying the bodies, the death, the people who are killed, the destruction of buildings. How can these seasoned journalists and observers and commentators not know what war is? That is war. I'm not supporting it. In fact, I oppose it in every fiber of my being. But that's war. That's what you do when you can't talk and can't agree and can't compromise and can't and won't negotiate. You have to kill the other side. Now, did Hamas come to a point where it couldn't stand what they were suffering anymore? I mean, why did they strike out? Because the answer to that question is what alternative there might be to continuing the war. What is it that Israel wants to protect it and its people and its visitors? You know, Senator Booker apparently had to hide during the attacks, and now he's left, the senator from New Jersey, and now he's headed home. How do we have a semblance of civilization once a war begins? And the experience of those we've observed, those we've read about, those we've been told about, are exactly this way. Men, women, and children are killed. And apparently nothing can stop it except ceasefires and agreements at the end of the war. Now, as of today, is there any possibility of that? I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say there's an 80% chance that war will go forward, period. And there'll be no efforts to settle the matter, and we will spend blood and treasure until one side or the other is unable to fight, or has been entirely vanquished and killed and suffered so much that they can't do anymore. That's where we are. So, is Hamas a force of combatants or a mass of terrorists? I mean, when we think of terrorists, I don't know that we think of an armed force like the one we saw. And I do think that the language matters here. If we're going to find a way, if there's any way, to settle this. You know, the few people have spoken and said, well, what we need is the two-nation agreement, two-nation-state agreements. Okay, but it hasn't moved. What can we do to have peace if these listed aggravating incidents did occur? How do we assure anybody they won't occur again? So this is a very difficult situation, and the best experts that I've heard on the air are basically talking about these things, and I think they're waiting for a time when dialogue or thought could matter. But right now, it doesn't. It's war. Whatever you call the names, whatever the just conclusion of the war could be, and I'm sure there are people who have suffered a family member, and for them there is no compromise. There's only death. And that's where we are. I don't know if you've read H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. I read everything he wrote. But I particularly liked that book because, well, you know, when I was younger, we're talking about Einstein, talking about the use of time, what changes, and so forth. And in The Time Machine, H.G. Wells, yes, he's positing a machine that can take him forward into the future. And the machine takes first a few years, and then many more years, and finally ends up in a society in which all humanity is divided into two parts. The Eloi, E-L-O-I, if I remember correctly, and the Morlocks, M-O-O-R-L-O-C-K-S. And some of you, if you don't read H.G. Wells, you may have seen this on film a couple of times. There was a great classic when I was young that I watched a few times. The difference between these two portions of humanity are that the Eloi are vegetarians, and they live above the earth, and they live on grassy plains, and they're peaceful. They don't fight. They don't war. The Morlocks are those who exist below the surface of the earth. They come out only at night, and basically they're cannibals because they eat the Eloi, who have become so soft with the evolution of the species that we have this division. And we could see the shades in our own experience of the Morlocks. They seem to be pretty dominant right now. You take a survey of what everybody's saying on TV and radio. Everybody's really into killing, getting ships out there, spending money, getting a new speaker ship so we can fight this war. Not a word about how we settle this. And it is too early. And maybe the leadership couldn't be taken seriously if they started talking about how do we end this war when they've only decided how they're going to fight it. And the hostages were taken for a reason. They're taken perhaps to, quote, educate them, perhaps to punish them, perhaps they found some people that have intelligence, also to secure themselves, if with the hostages, from attacks. Of course, the military decision here would be the hostages are just at risk. So we have that. So while we're talking about world matters, let's talk about securing our borders. Now, it must have occurred to some of you and to me that we wait until immigration's a problem, we do nothing about it, it gets worse, and then we do something terrible. You know, stand out there on the earth in Mexico until we get to you, or whatever. Why can't we take the money and build the buildings and hire the agents and get more judges and do this right? Or change the law, or put certain limits that we do not now have to protect us from an overage of applications, because the world is in crisis and there are many more seeking asylum, and not just from South America. There were years ago when we were having our crises with Trump, they had an advertisement for those who would come and be volunteer judges because they didn't have enough judges to handle a case. And I thought, well, I'd go down and do that for a while. I put in my information, never heard a word. I wasn't doing it for whatever small compensation they would give. I wasn't doing it for any personal advantage. I'm sure there were others who felt the same way. And never heard from them. So what if we did the intelligent thing, which is scoped out what the requirements were for an immigration setup that actually could comport with not just the law, but decency. But we don't do that. What if we saw to it that we had places to hold families and those who might legitimately be considered? And is the fear going to be that so many more will come? Well, then we have to address the problem in a multi-state way. And we have done that to some extent previously. But you see, Congress doesn't want a decision on this. From time to time, they talk about it, raise money, pointing the fingers at each party, and nothing happens. Minor things happen. And while we're at the border, let's talk about the wall. Now, no doubt in some of the coverage of what's happening in Israel and Hamas, you've seen the, I don't know how you would put it, curtain, wall that had to be breached with explosives to attack, for the Hamas to attack Israel. Okay. Apparently, Trump managed to get money for the wall that has not been spent. And people are pushing Biden to use that money to continue building the wall. Forget it. First, he promised he wouldn't. Second, how are you going to make the president do it? I would say I'll get to it. I'll get to it in the morning. I'll get to it tomorrow. I'll get to it next day. And I would never, ever get to it. Arrest me. Put me in jail. I am not building that damn wall. So, why are some of these things so complicated? They're complicated because we don't know the whole story. Every one of these things that seems to have a somewhat obvious remedy is only obvious because we don't know the hidden considerations that went into the announced proposition that, oh, yeah, now we got to spend this other money on the wall. So, now, as for modern day campaigning, for the position I'm running, there are certain approaches that one can take. And it's not like running for certain other seats. But among the things that I do, besides jammering away about what the job is and why I think I'd like to do it and why you might want me to do it, is circulating signs, for example. And I visited a home today, and the fella at first was glad to take my sign to put it out in front of his house. But then he paused. And the reason he paused was because people have gone by his house, and because of the Democratic signs for other candidates, they have thrown things on his lawn, and they have shouted things that his young children hear. And he said, well, maybe when they go to college, I can return to my my more liberal self. And I said, well, just add one more sign. And he said he would, and he did, and I put it up. But I have noticed that there are fewer signs up this year, and I think there are probably several reasons. And it's not just that they don't cost that much usually. It is that people distrust the government, don't want to be involved, don't want to be identified as taking one position or another. Now, I understand that feeling, but that surrender is a critical error, because the next step is to presume silence and passivity and to do whatever the hell they want. And we have some real bizarre people running here in Virginia, and I wouldn't doubt that that's the case elsewhere. So that's my comment for today, and glad to be with you, and soon it'll get a lot more orange out here. So, from the Cathedral of Trees, until next time, bye-bye.